My question is, how does it feel, David, that you have invented a theory that's maybe as fundamental as classical conditioning or so for psychology, and that it had so, well, were so few people responding to it over the years?
It would have been nice if everyone had picked up on it, and the people who saw it seem to agree with it. The physiology agrees with it, but you're right, it has not been picked up on. I think the main reason was that people weren't looking for a theory. When I was making a tour around America, going to different universities, most of them hadn't even asked the question of what is the physiological basis of putting memory down. Stanford University was one exception, and there it went over very well. But I think the questions still have not been asked. What has happened, and I think this is understandable, is that the applications that came from it, those have gotten a lot of publicity. I'm famous in Italy anyway,
Yes.
because of being able to answer some questions like how to treat alcoholism.
But, well, in fact, the applications are interesting and they work, but the failure of reaching this audience is because they are stuck with another theory or other theories that they learned before. And
Yes. They have two other theories. In the first place, they have a theory, the Hebbian rule for things, neurons, synapses get stronger when they're used. Makes sense, and people can accept this very easily. It happens to be wrong. If you built a brain out of this, it would explode like an atomic bomb because it's a positive reaction. People don't worry about that. The brain's exploding like an atomic bomb. So what? I mean, the theory makes sense. But I think even a greater problem is that most people have this common sense theory of behavior. And it is basically a non-physical theory. It is the theory of mind that you were talking about. What was the guy's name who wrote the book?
LeBaron.
LeBaron, right. I'm going to have to go through that. But I think that is what he was talking about also. And this theory of psychological theory of what we do answers people's questions. And it doesn't go down to the level of neurons. It can't. It is basically a metaphysical theory, but it satisfies people. And therefore, they're not going down and asking the questions of what lies underneath of it. Now, one point on this is that there are exceptions. There are places, particularly when you're dealing with drug addiction, when the theory, the common sense theory, doesn't make sense. People don't act rationally when they're taking drugs. When they're taking alcohol, it does not make sense. You don't get enough pleasure from it to make up for all of the pain that comes in. And any alcoholic can tell you he does it because he's wired that way. So these things we can't treat, or we can now, but you have to go down to the neurological basis. So maybe it's the way that all theories go. You have a basic theory, to be very grandiose in another field, you have Newtonian physics, which explains a lot until you come to a couple exceptions. You have to note the exceptions and eventually come up with another theory which is able to incorporate the exceptions. And I think that's essentially what is happening here.
In my view, you've always been a person who was very original in his thoughts, and you were considering all kinds of hypotheses or ideas about, for instance, Osama bin Laden or three-dimensional monitors or so. Has it been always that way when you were young, that you always consider yourself to be an inventor, or?
Well, I never saw myself as a revolutionary. I never was out to fight against anything else. But I get very frustrated with something that doesn't make sense. I want to understand it. And I don't care what has gone before. And often what I'm frustrated with is looking at what has come before and seeing that it doesn't make sense. Looking at what the administration is doing and seeing it doesn't make sense. Or looking at what is in the textbooks and seeing that this just does not make logical sense. It doesn't fit together. And then I'm not happy just leaving it there. I want to find out how you can put it together, how you can make sense out of this. What is the solution to it? What often happens is that a beginning solution almost forms immediately before my mind. And then I have to go back. Well, this is what happened with the treatment of panic disorders I was describing to you. I listened to what other people were presenting on it, and immediately there was the solution. Now, it took me another week to go back and get all of the information behind it in order to make sure, to test it out, this was a correct solution. There are other times, much more likely, is to be seeing pictures. Theory development is usually a matter of trying to put the information I've gotten verbally into pictures, and once it's there, then it can be manipulated, or maybe it just falls together altogether immediately into something that can connect the dots. And then you have to detranslate it out of that, to take it from the parallel processing of this picture image that you have into, well, you have this up here and this down there. And that's the hard part, trying to find words that match these visual images. Of course, you know the same thing.
Yeah. So my question is, when somebody wants to start off working with the Sinclair method, how would you describe it to them when they already do have background in neurology a little bit and psychology?
Okay. Most of the people who are doing this also have a background in alcohol. And I think the first thing is a new understanding of what causes alcoholism. This isn't just us, this is what's happened in the field. It used to be that alcoholism was considered to be caused by physiological dependence or in some way by tolerance or things like that. And all of this, it turns out that those are side effects of taking a lot of alcohol, that you become adapted to it, physiologically dependent. But it has almost nothing to do with the addiction. The addiction is an overwhelming drive behavior to take the alcohol, an uncontrollable behavior of drinking. And what needs to be realized is that this is learned. That each time a person drinks alcohol, it releases endorphins, sort of the body's own opiates. And when the endorphins are released, they're bathing like local hormones over throughout the brain. Whatever was just done before gets stronger. It's reinforcing. And so the behavior of drinking gets stronger, and everything else, going to the pub, all of the emotions that you had, all of the ideas that you had at that moment just before drinking get stronger. There's a genetic component in this, that some people get very little endorphins when they drink, other people get a lot, and how effective the endorphins are. So some people have a high risk of this learning. In these people, eventually the behavior becomes so strong that basically they cannot control it. They can control it for a little bit, but it overwhelms them. And they're the alcoholics. It isn't a all or none, it's a continuum as the behavior gets stronger and stronger. So what do you do about a behavior that's too strong. We've known for ages the body has its own way of undoing learning. We've known this since Pavlov's time. Pavlov's dog learned to salivate when you rang the bell and gave the food. The opposite of this is the process of extinction. This is when you make the behavior but don't get the reinforcement. And this is like an eraser. It's the brain's way of removing, weakening those connections that had gotten too strong. So how do you drink alcohol and not get the reinforcement from the endorphins? And that's where we use the medicine of naltrexone or nalmefene. They both work the same way. And they're opiate antagonists. They don't do anything themselves really, but they fit into the receptor where endorphins go. It's like putting the wrong key into the lock. And as long as the naltrexone is in the opiate receptor, you can take morphine and you don't feel it. It won't kill the pain either. And you can drink alcohol and you don't get the reinforcement. You don't get the strengthening. And instead, when you make the behavior and don't get the reinforcement, this is a trigger that starts the mechanism of extinction. This is the brain's way of getting rid of mistakes, of things that don't work anymore. So each time that the patient drinks alcohol while on naltrexone, the next day the behavior is a little bit weaker. It isn't weaker immediately. It doesn't take away the drive. The medicine doesn't take it away. But during the hours afterwards, the behavior gets weaker. And thus, what we see when we did it in rats was that over a week's time, the behavior got weaker and weaker. Humans are more complex. It takes months for them. But as you were looking at on the picture out there, the curves are beautiful extinction curves in human beings for how much they crave the alcohol and how much they drink.
What do you think about the combination of having this package treatment, as they do it in control clinics? Well, did they add it with some kind of psychotherapy, as you know? And how did they do it? Or how did they do it?
First, let me say that you don't need the therapy. That when I'm giving the rats naltrexone before they drink, that it does work all by itself. I try to give the rats therapy. I say don't drink, and they don't listen to me. But and there have been clinical trials done here in Finland and in Australia with nalmefene and naltrexone, and there are significant benefits just with the medicines alone. Now, my guess is that therapy helps also. And frankly, I'd like to have clinical trials proving this also. But in the meantime, we go ahead with our guesses on this. And so we have made up packages of programs of treatment that go along with it, of counseling. The way that we did it at Contral was to have one authority figure, medical doctor ordinarily, and one psychologist or therapist type. And they would have about 8 sessions and alternate between them. A lot of what they did was to explain to the patients about extinction, using some of the paintings they have up on the wall here in order to help illustrate that what's happened in the brain, how you become an alcoholic. Somehow it helps to see it in a picture, to realize that I become wired this way. And, well, if you can recognize that the wiring has changed, then you can imagine weakening the wiring, cutting the wiring, and getting rid of the behavior. Another thing that is done is to fill the vacuum. An alcoholic has spent 20 years or so developing an entire realm of behavior around the drinking. And all of the other people with him have developed a behavior set that matches in with this. If you just stop drinking, you do have a vacuum. It's very good if the people are encouraged in other things to do, what they can do to occupy their time. somewhat along this line, if you were not using extinction, just in old-fashioned ways of treatment, most of which have not been very effective, but the one thing that has been shown to be a good predictor of success in regular treatment is a change in the environment. It's learned. It's learned to various things, like salivating to the bell. If you don't hear the bell, you don't salivate. If you don't see Joe's Pub, maybe you don't drink at Joe's Pub. So if you're living in the city, move to the country. If you're living in the country, move to the city. If you're married, get divorced. If you're divorced, get married. These things are usually bad. I mean, a major change in life is a disruptor with bad consequences for many things. But in treating addictions, it's a good thing. One example of this that is well known is with the heroin addiction of Vietnam veterans. They had expected that when they were in Vietnam, a large percentage of the soldiers had drug problems. And they thought when they came back to the States that it'd be horrible. But it turned out that it was very minor, that San Francisco was not Saigon. The environment was completely different, and so it was relatively simple to stop the behaviors that had been learned in that environment. So the counseling can also help people to change the environment. There's been a lot of work put into trying to develop it, and it depends upon the culture. The clinic in Israel uses somewhat different things than the clinic in Venezuela, and somewhat different than the Finnish clinic. It would be nice if we knew what is best, but maybe there isn't any one best. Maybe it is best for a particular clinician. Some clinicians work better with one technique. This is also a place where there is maybe room for innovation. We don't know what the best way to do it is. But I do believe that having counseling does help.
So one thing is that when it is so successful, why didn't it, conquer the world yet?
Yeah, in Finland it has. I mean, we've treated like 60,000 so far. It took a lot of innovation. But the biggest problem, and this we run into in America, is the infrastructure. You have an entire community that is built with, starting off with detoxification, and the insurance companies pay per detox. Our method skips detox. So where do you get your money? I gave a presentation at a huge hospital, detox hospital in Virginia Beach, and they agreed with the science is clear. But what could they do? Their method of working is to take in somebody that is assigned by the state for detoxification, and they go through the detox. They know that 90% are going to relapse right back again to drinking, and they didn't disagree with the numbers that we're getting 78-80% success rates, but you got to eat. Where's the money going to come from? And so this takes innovation. It takes somebody who's willing to come in starting de novo or with a new way to, or to simplify drastically from the way it has been done. One thing we need to do is a really proper cost analysis on this, but what we were doing here in Finland was suggesting that the savings per patient is up in tens of thousands of dollars. I mean, the most expensive thing is the inpatient treatment of the detox. And this is also can be dangerous if you're not using any other medicines. It's like a 2% mortality rate. It used to be in the old days. Nowadays, they solve this problem by giving benzodiazepines or barbiturates. They don't die, but you have a high rate of people becoming addicted to these other drugs. And the idea of giving a high addiction-prone medicine to these addiction-prone people is not very good. With our procedure, you have a patient who was drinking yesterday. With naltrexone, you have to have a liver test. So there's one little pause there. Nalmefene, you don't need to have that. But he was drinking yesterday. Tomorrow, he takes a pill before drinking. There is no inpatient phase, and gradually, over the next months, the drinking goes down and down and down. It is a detoxification method in itself. They were physiologically dependent when they started. When they're at the end of the 3 months, they're no longer physiologically dependent. Moreover, it's the safest way to do it. We've always known that if you want to stop using a medicine, it's much better to taper down slowly than to stop it abruptly. And this way it happens automatically. And as I was mentioning to you the other day, our research is suggesting that as far as brain damage from alcohol, it's not caused by the drinking, it's caused by the stopping. Each time you go through this detox or severe hangover, you're killing off brain cells. Rats that drank every day, their brains were fine. Ones that had it 4 days a week and then detoxed, they had brain damage. Almost certainly it's the same with humans. So it's much safer if you taper it down. The trick is to get a structure, a social structure in which people are getting this treatment and somehow being supported for doing it.
I heard there were problems in several countries when they tried to start off clinical trials in which they had to have their patients go on drinking in combination with the pills. That didn't work. How did that happen, and what is the problem?
Well, it's sort of the other way around. There have been clinical trials where naltrexone didn't work, but the problem has been that they did not allow the patients to drink. You must make the response of drinking while you're on the naltrexone. If Pavlov's dog never salivated when the bell was ringing, if the bell never rang, you got to make the response. If he never salivated, it'd never be extinguished. He'd still be salivating today. The problem was that the only other medicine that's ever been approved by the FDA or previously for alcoholism treatment was antabuse. Now, antabuse can kill you if you drink. And so the idea was that you detoxify an alcoholic, you give them antabuse, disulfiram, and you tell them, do not drink, you'll get very, very sick or die if you drink. And since alcohol drinking is a very logical, rational disease behavior, they will stop drinking. Yeah, it is not a rational behavior, and the people end up stopping the disulfiram or digging the capsules out. But the problem is that this was the mindset of many people in the field, that you detoxify the patient, then you give them medicine and say don't drink. And so many of the clinical trials have been done. There was a big one at Yale this way, there was the one in Germany that was done this way, in which they detoxify the patients, they say do not drink any alcohol, and here is your naltrexone. And it doesn't work this way. This we proved in our Finnish clinical trial. We did it two ways. We had two different groups, or actually four groups, two with placebo. In one case, it was just like that. The patients were told, here's your naltrexone and do not drink. Join AA, whatever, but do not drink. It was actually worse than placebo. The patients were slightly worse than the ones who got a sugar pill that didn't do anything. On the other hand, there was another group that was told, you're supposed to just control the drinking. Here's your pill. The important thing is always take the pill before drinking. Never drink without taking the pill. So it's the type of controlled drinking. They took the pill and then drank. And there the results are beautiful. The placebo is down horrible. And by the way, that's the thing. Don't tell placebo patients or ones without naltrexone to go to controlled drinking. It does not work. But with naltrexone, controlled drinking was the way to go. And so we got nice significant differences. You've got to use it the right way. It has to be used so that extinction is possible. You can see this looking back in the clinical trials. We just published last year a summary of all of the clinical trials that have been done. Can't remember the exact number, but it's something like 40 trials have done it in ways in which drinking extinction was possible, and all but 3 of them have been positive. And then there are another 35 trials that have done it in ways that you can't drink, like giving it in a hospital. While the people are in the hospital, here's your naltrexone while you're in the hospital. Failed completely. And there's one that reported significant results out of 35. So it's a very clear result. You have to use naltrexone or nalmefene with a protocol that allows you to drink at the same time.